This evening we are in Santa Fe, New Mexico, and I have the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Daniel Smith-Jenkins. Dr. Daniel Smith-Jenkins holds a PhD from Johns Hopkins University. For 11 years, he worked in adult psychiatric services at Baltimore General, where he specialized in the treatment of chemical dependency. Dr. Smith-Jenkins won the Sandra O'Connor Prize twice for excellence in the field of addiction studies. He also served as chief medical director for 3 rehabilitation campuses in California. Hi, my name is James Miller, and this is The James Miller Show. It's a pleasure to be here, Mr. Miller. Thank you for having me. Dr. Smith-Jenkins, talk to me about retirement. In the morning, I wake up, drink a cup of coffee, read the paper, then I tend to the cattle. I have 3 heifers and a stud. Keep hoping for a calf. In the afternoon, I bale hay in the fields, then head down to the bathhouse where I sweat in the hot springs. I hear the magnesium levels in New Mexico are really off the charts. That and the sodium bicarbonate, second to none, I assure you. Why did you leave the profession at age 50? You had the good life. You won the Sandra O'Connor Prize twice. Nobody does that. Well, during the course of my tenure as medical director, I worked at 3 rehabilitation facilities. That's 4,000 clients. I prescribed millions of pills. I also kept a journal, and I wrote in that journal daily. Everything I saw, James, everything I heard. And by the time my journal was complete, I said, that's it, and I got up and I left. You just walked away. I collected my things, sold my house in San Bernardino, and I got on a plane for New Mexico. I'd always wanted to raise cattle. Burnout, disillusionment, fear, disgust. Disgust? I was disgusted by my profession labeling addiction as a disease. But the disease model of addiction is the only model that makes sense. Addiction is a biochemical process that occurs when a substance is introduced into the bloodstream and the brain, then repeatedly reintroduced, therein causing tolerance, craving, withdrawal, sobriety, relapse, organ failure, mortality, and on very rare occasions, total abstinence. But let me be clear, this is no multiple myeloma. You give me 10 days, I can turn you into an opioid addict. But the cancer analogy is consistent with the research. Even with my limited understanding, the criteria for addiction to qualify as a disease is present, thereby mandating treatment. Allow me to circle back. Take your time. Circle back. Historically, treatment services for the alcoholic or the addict were either not covered under insurance plans or were heavily restricted. As a result, many Americans were unable to access affordable care for the horrifying condition of acute withdrawal syndrome. You follow? A dark time in American history. Eons and eons, for hundreds of years, addiction was seen as a moral defect. Anyone struggling with the bottle or the pill was labeled a deviant, a sociopath, someone who needed to be locked up. Then came the 90s and the early aughts and the epidemic. At the height of the epidemic, the president instituted healthcare reform, which mandated that insurance providers allocate hundreds of millions of dollars for the coverage of addiction. In this case, government funding led to a complete and dramatic surge of new treatment centers across the U.S. Surely, and that's a wonderful thing. When looking at it through the veil of ignorance, it's great, because through this same time period, deaths from addiction should have been plummeting, right? Wrong. Rather, they were skyrocketing. You're contending that offering more assistance is malicious. It depends on the intention. The intention? Listen, I've been around for a long time. I'm 47 years old, but I'm not a fool. I feel like you take me for a fool, doctor. I don't take you for anything, Mr. Miller. I've been haunted by my own decisions as a medical professional, as a father, so I'm blowing my horn. But the horn you blow is pessimistic. It sounds like a poisonous horn. I understand why you think I'm spewing poison. I completely do, because you, like so many, fall victim to their credentials, their legislation, their lies. Because we hope to beat this thing, doctor. You can't beat this thing, Mr. Miller. Yes, we can. No. You have to accept it, and you have to work with it, and you have to live with it. It's maddening you talk like this. You were on the front lines. You believed in hope. Too many people are dying, which is why we've got to find better methods to crush this disease. Please stop calling it a disease. That is what I call it, unabashedly so. I call it a disease, a brain disease, a disease of choice. What do you call it? A bad habit. A bad habit. Surely you're joking. No. Dr. Smith-Jenkins, we're live right now. Your words carry a cost. The cost of my daughter. Your what? 3 months before I quit, I was in Calabasas, California, attending a seminar called The Science of Choice. And during the morning lecture, I received a phone call. It was my ex-wife. She was in a rage. She had found Melody on the bathroom floor. I'm so sorry, Dr. Smith-Jenkins. Before the fall, Melody had been sober, 5 years clean. Then one day, she picked up again. She made a choice. It was her responsibility. Do you get where I'm going with this now? Listen, I respect your position, and I am so sorry to hear about your daughter, but Dr. Smith-Jenkins, in the future, I foresee science having cured us and taking little red pills to wash away such insidious desires. So for now, we need to focus on anti-craving medications, partial agonists, treatment centers, and recovery. It's parasitic. Parasitic. The system latches onto the addict, then it sucks her dry, all the while creating chaos in the family unit, walking away with bags of cash, leaving the addict in confusion, guilt, and disarray. There has to be more to it than dollars and cents. You have actual experience working with a number of rehabs, correct? Malibu Passions in Malibu, Bright Horizons in Big Sur, and Simple Solutions in San Bernardino. What was your job description at Simple Solutions in San Bernardino? I oversaw clinical programming. In other words, you were there to help clients get clean. Yes, but I was also mandated to provide documentation to insurance companies in order to prove that patients actually needed medication management. Thus, I was routinely administering buprenorphine, lorazepam, alprazolam, and ketamine. But the statistics say there's no oversight. Listen, the system can function completely in a vacuum. It's better than doing nothing. 100 years ago, it used to be that a person decided to stop binging and went to the sanitarium for a 5 to 7 day phenobarbital detox. That's all that was needed to just rid the body of the toxins and reduce acute withdrawal syndrome. I understand the purpose of a medically assisted detox, I do, but it takes more than 5 to 7 days for the mind to heal, to recover. You'd probably get a huge kick out of inpatient treatment. Why would you say that? I stopped using needles in the 90s when Marco died. Rehabs now offer an array of education classes, cognitive restructuring, DBT, process groups, psychodrama, yoga, meditation, and equine therapy. That sounds wonderful. Wake up. I've heard a lot lately regarding equine therapy. The science says these creatures, as well as their human counterparts, share an intrinsic connection via touch and emotional feedback. Where the hell did you read this? In a journal. It was a highly credentialed medical journal. I can't remember what the title of it was, but James, it's horse therapy. You're playing me for a fool. It tricks them. It confuses them into a belief that they're bonding with this beautiful beast that more often than not is pissed as all get out that some oversharing crackhead has her thick thighs spread eagled over her ribcage and is kicking in her guts. Oh, and also, equine therapists routinely believe patients can communicate with these horses via energy fields. I mean, I don't know if I believe this, but apparently you're the expert because, hey, the science says, right? Maybe they can, Dr. Smith-Jenkins. Maybe some of these equestrian psychologists are onto something that you can't see. Where is your belief? My belief was deconstructed by pod after pod of clients singing the praises of Process Group and then dying 6 days later. Talk about process group. You teach them how to process thoughts, feelings, so it's experiential. No, and yes, licensed clinical social workers often persuade clients that they just don't know how to process feelings because their addiction was just a means for covering up grief. That sounds like something that's horseshit. Every human being finds ways to cover up her feelings. That's called survival. I feel like you're discounting the process. Trauma is real, Dr. Smith-Jenkins. Would you not agree? In my experience, therapists will often push a mindset on the client that they potentially suffered a horrific trauma when they were an adolescent or a child, such as abuse. It's typically abuse, emotional, sexual, psychological, all of the above. You're pulling my leg and I don't like it. Keep going. If we can convince a client that their addiction stems from an underlying trauma, then we can keep them there a lot longer. It's exactly what they do in prison. It's how they keep inmates from attaining parole. Why? Because look, patients and prisoners are one and the same. In our society, they all need to fully process their past, right? Certainly, I would agree with that. I mean, these people need help to be able to mentally, emotionally overcome a suffocating trigger in order to re-engage with the self and society. The majority of addicts don't actually suffer from trauma. That's my point. Most addicts just like to get high. Most prisoners weren't sodomized as children. Most prisoners just committed egregious crimes because they're addicts or they're bad human beings. You ever heard of the principle of Occam's razor? You mean Sir William of Ockham, the medieval scientist/philosopher? I absolutely adore his work. In the 14th century, William of Ockham theorized that entities should not be multiplied unnecessarily, which is interpreted as meaning that the simplest of competing theories should always be preferred to the more complex explanation. In other words, keep it simple, stupid. In other words, just say no. Most addicts struggle with that simple word, no. It's called make a decision, get it together, and change for the better. It can't be that simple. It's too simple. It's too convincing. Well, yes. To hell with logic. Simplicity be damned. What about dual diagnosis? I'm reading lots about dual diagnosis in those medical journals. You in these medical journals. You need to get more sunlight. Go on a date with a beautiful woman. Beautiful woman. Come My private life is my private life. And you're a medical doctor. Keep going. I was a medical doctor. I raise cattle now. I breed calves. Dr. Smith-Jenkins, it's my understanding that a significant majority of burnouts and juice heads are in fact suffering from a host of mental handicaps. Is that accurate? Naturally, there are those patients suffering from schizophrenia, and that is a horrifying, highly misunderstood condition. Or ADHD, which is complete hogwash and a great excuse for synthetic coke. Or clinical depression, which nearly all living creatures cope with at various stages throughout their lives. Even animals? Of course animals get depressed. My heifers are depressed as fuck right now because their boyfriend the stud would rather eat cornmeal and look at the sky than have sex with them. Oh, I think I know a lot about that kind of depression. Keep going. Look, addicts use drugs and alcohol to feel good. That's it. Fascinating. I'm still having a hard time digesting this kind of simplicity. It's just too much of a leap to go from the strict science, which claims that medication management, as well as counseling and treatment, are the solution, as opposed to your assertion that the addict just wants to feel good, but really needs to cut the crap and just say no. That's basically it. Okay, but there are no buts. They just want to feel drunk, high, lit, wet, pickled, pie-eyed, smashed, looped, fried, blottoed. I've never heard that one. Obliterated, loaded, tight, stiffed, bolted, jammed. Oh, I like that one. And that's really it. Just getting cockeyed and squiffed all day, every day. Listen, there's nothing more to it. Stop adding to the equation. So why then are we pushing all these labels and theories? Because theories and labels allow us to feel warranted and paying high dollar to treat our hedonistic sons and daughters. But why all the trauma therapy if it isn't justified? Because we all have a need to feel heard. You follow? You're claiming that some addicts create trauma in order to feel understood or to wash over their failures with a top-notch justification system. It's a need that's filled. Attention. You follow? Escape from loneliness and despair. That sounds amazing. Who wouldn't want that? We all want to escape from loneliness and despair. It feels as if almost you're minimizing the need to have connectivity, to have each other. Counselors and recovery coaches know full well that addicts are vulnerable and sensitive during this time. And we're circling back now. Most addicts, from my research, did not, in fact, suffer serious trauma. But everyone has suffered some form of trauma. Why? Because you want it that way? Because science says so? No, at some point, someone on the up and up convinced these clinicians that their therapy modules needed to be predicated on the grounds that most addicts suffered abuse in some form or fashion, even if it never occurred. So much of abuse, we say, is a repressed memory, right? So who is the patient to protest? If you don't remember, we call it repressed. So you help them find or create a circumstance in which they were victimized. And then once you found that, whether real or imagined, you have them process the event. The aim is to create an environment where clients feel safe enough to process pain for an extended period of time. And once we're convinced they've created an authentic, traumatic experience, then we let them proceed. Typically, it takes about 3 months to adequately process trauma. Why not 3 days, or 3 hours, or 3 minutes? And what does it even mean to process a memory? Nothing at all, actually. It's absolutely meaningless. I, for instance, have many memories. I remember going to the state fair when I was 5 and buying my first corn dog and eating an apple fritter with my dad. I remember my father spanking me with a switch in front of my best friend, Tom Keller. There was embarrassment and there was fear. I remember there were ghosts with big oblong faces with blood hanging from their lips. I remember a period of time wanting to play with dolls, but I also remember sitting next to my best friend, Tom Keller, in the back seat of his father's old station wagon. Oh, what a day. We were headed to his house by the bay, and I watched tremulously as the car swerved to avoid colliding with that 18-wheeler that had jackknifed ahead of us. So I grabbed Tom's hand, and the station wagon veered hard right, then spun uncontrollably like a spindle top, flipping 3 times before burning off into that dense thicket of bog and cypress trees. And the momentum, God, the momentum, it just kept caving inward, the universe and the world and the car, which was just ramming and bouncing out tree after tree after tree. And I watched as my best friend Tom Keller's head. All of these memories, I cannot process unless Alzheimer's or brain cancer or suicide. But we do not encourage that. Dr. Daniel Smith-Jenkins, my brain is a diorama of elaborate scenes that I see or hear and recreate ad nauseum. And as much as I try, and I do try very hard, to wash them from my eyes, to detoxify the shaking, rattling thoughts that bring me to tears late, very late into the black, black night, these memories are imprisoned in my brain tubes. And that's natural, James. Which begs the question, how often are patients seeing counselors? Most treatment centers, once a week. Once a week? Counselors are working with dozens of patients, and so she is given a homework assignment between sessions, even though the sessions are rare and often lacking in breakthroughs. Sounds like anything the client could accomplish at home. It's called go to a detox facility, get the chemicals out of your system, then become an adult and make a bloody decision. Golly. It's so easy for you, isn't it? It's almost like I can't even fathom. You can't fathom it because it's too easy. People don't like easy nowadays. People like chaos. You want to see a counselor? Excellent. That'll run you about $250 a week, as opposed to $7,000 at a treatment center. Or you could just say, that's that. Stop drinking. Stop pushing needles down your veins. Or you could just counsel yourself with a nice cup of coffee, a great book by Plato, and some Beethoven. Bingo! Talk to me about psychodrama. In psychodrama, you have the client sit in a circle. All right. And they're surrounded by all kinds of props and wigs and stuffed animals. Phenomenal. And they act out a traumatic experience in front of the group. It could be your own funeral, per se, where you deliver a eulogy to yourself, or it could be the loss of a loved one, like with your friend Tom Keller. Oh, gosh. That was wrong of me. That was in left field. I shouldn't have brought it up. It's okay. I was trying to forget. His head literally fell into my lap. I was holding him there. His head, I mean, and a little sliver of his spinal column that had jutted out from the neck and was poking into my rib cage. What else do they act out in psychodrama? Incest, carnage, bestiality. So for every client, you hope to find something that was shocking, traumatic. 100%. In art therapy, for instance, they draw pictures of their shame, or they paint rocks with words such as resentment and gratitude. Then they throw these rocks into a clear running stream in an effort to let it all go. Another compelling trick is to issue clients an assignment where they write the narrative of their addiction. It has to be 40 pages, mandatory minimum, and at the end of treatment, they burn it in a blazing fire. How ironic. What? With all this therapy, all this processing, aren't clients actually burning these memories further into the fabric of their minds, therein further cementing that shame? There never is an aha moment, James. Aha moments don't actually exist. If you were raped, you were raped. That's unfortunate. If you had sex with a prostitute whose pimp held you hostage for 17 days until you anteed up 5 G's from your granddaddy's bank account, that's troubling. There are no revelations, though. Stop looking for revelations. There is only the truth. It happened. It sucks. Move forward. Choose life. And stop processing so much. The more you process, the more it takes a hold of you. Dr. Smith-Jenkins, what is the average cost of rehab? $1,000 a day. For 28 days? National average is now hovering at 45. Do the math, it's disgusting. Why the cataclysm? Insurance, what else? Look, if you can keep a client 45, 90, 180 days based off of pseudoscience and quackery, then you're looking at insurance providers being billed anywhere from 30 to 180 grand. In the past 20 years, James, hundreds of new treatment centers popped up. These places are like charter schools, and their owners are raking in boatloads and buying yachts. You can literally take an old barn, put in a couple of bunk beds, hire a licensed clinical social worker, and call it a treatment facility. Take a gander at their advertising pamphlets. You're going to notice they often claim success rates of 70%. Are these numbers accurate? In no way, shape, or form are they accurate. How can they ethically report such inflated statistics? Because you can't report what you can't see or hear with your own eyes and ears. In other words, sobriety. Fact. Guess the actual long-term success rate of rehabilitated addicts. Let's see, I'm feeling generous today. I'm going to go with, 50%. Try again. 40%? Nope. No. 25%. Keep going. Okay. 10%. Not yet. Fine. 3%. Final answer. What if I told you it was 2%? 2% success rate? Not on your life. It's obtuse, isn't it? Listen, the sad reality is this. Most addicts are just not going to stay sober, Mr. Miller. By definition, an addict is someone who struggles to maintain sobriety and usually dies. I'd never really thought about it that way. That actually makes sense. 2% of addicts who enter recovery will remain sober for the rest of their lives without relapse. Millions and millions will die. Hundreds of thousands by overdose, millions by liver failure, heart attack, stroke, or suicide. And if they don't, they're probably not truly addicted, because this is what I know, James. If you're truly an addict, you're fucked. Why don't rehabs report 2% then? What happened to rigorous honesty? The program of AA necessitates rigorous honesty. First of all, stop mentioning AA. Don't do that, okay? Second of all, if a rehab reports a 1% recovery rate, who is going to attend that rehab? What parent is going to send her daughter there? What judge is going to sentence John C. McGillicuddy with 7 DUIs and 13 public intoxication charges to a treatment center with a 2% success rate? They'd be fools to attend. Naturally. So we have to inflate the statistics. I'm literally disgusted by everything right now. Rightfully so, that's within your right as a human being. So the business model is taking an individual who is actively dying, claiming the ability to cure him or her with a 70% success rate, having them process hidden feelings that may or may not be repressed, directing them to perform role plays of their trauma or engage their energy fields via horse therapy, and then charging them anywhere from 30 to 180K in order to facilitate nothingness except shame, despair, and an empty bank account. Now we're talking. I think you got most of it. And you want to hear the worst part? It gets worse. You're desperate for help, so you call a treatment facility. They're going to tell you anything you want to hear in order to get you there, right? But what they don't tell you, or the judge for that matter, is that rehab involves a step-down approach, where the 45 to 90-day model isn't near enough. Now, we're looking at putting large rolls of cash into the pockets of the rehab owners from anywhere from 6 months to 2 years. What on earth are you talking about? In the bozo-laden world of addiction science, we call it a continuum of care. Isn't that a mouthful? A continuum of care. In essence, nothing more than a system of forced imprisonment and loss of all monetary funds through months and months of step-downs. Okay, so you're out of jail and you're on probation. So the judge mandates 6 months of treatment where you will be in a highly structured level of existence before transitioning to a lower level of existence until you can safely achieve independent existence, which isn't really independent because now you're under constant supervision and living in a facility-owned housing community called extended care with 47 other barflies and barheads and juice heads and dope fiends before stepping down once again into one of our brand new sober living homes. This will now run you roughly, $1,400 a month for at least a year. Why? Because the science says so. According to research, newly sober people are, quote, highly vulnerable to stress due to limited coping skills and emotional instability. And the unchecked elevation of stress often equates to relapse. Therefore, a more effective strategy is to provide a gradual, structured transition through multiple levels of care. Keep in mind, this information is being supplied by the rehabilitation centers themselves. Very trustworthy indeed. And what happens if you leave the program? For starters, the judge is alerted, in which case you violate parole and return to prison. If you're there on your own volition, your own family is turned against you. In the industry, we call it tough love. The hit verbiage therapist uses, don't enable them, love them but leave them. In essence, don't ever bail them out. Is this legal? Of course it's legal. People love punishment. So you tear families apart in order to get longer financial commitments. You never heard me say yes, but regardless, at the end of it all that's left for the client is just to get a real job at about $15 an hour and go to AA. Hey, guess what, Billy? You just did 2 years of treatment and completed sober living? Hell yeah, now it's time to rework those steps. Listen, the program of Alcoholics Anonymous has saved millions of lives since its inception in the 1920s. I know dozens of fine women and men who swear by the program and whose lives have been turned around and whose characters are top tier. These are good human beings, doctor. They have the courage now and the strength because they finally admitted their character defects. They finally admitted the powerlessness to the addiction that was absolutely killing them and ravaging them and ripping apart the lives of their loved ones. It's a cult, Mr. Miller. AA is a cult that wants to limit you as a person of power, choice, and strength. Powerlessness from alcohol and drugs. Lack of power is the greatest lie that coward ever sold you. And by the way, you want to know what the real disease is? Loneliness. Eternal loneliness. Now get over yourselves and start being decent human beings. After the recording of our program, Dr. Daniel Smith-Jenkins continued following his bliss by raising cattle on his ranch in New Mexico. I even heard news that he acquired a new stud bull and that one of his heifers soon gave birth to a calf, who Dr. Smith-Jenkins named Melody. Thank you all for watching. My name is James Miller, and this is The James Miller Show.